Okay, looks like we're ready to go. I guess by starting off, I want to just welcome everyone to the Iris Automation virtual booth here at Commercial UAV Expo. This is our second session, so thank you for joining us. This is going to be a good one with Trevor Lynn, who's our Director of Airspace Integration, and he'll be going over the BVLOS regulatory environment, specifically the FAA and here in the United States. Before we get started, I want to encourage everyone to drop your questions in the chat room or in the Q&A option there, so we can get to it following Trevor's brief presentation. So feel free to any questions that you might have. Feel free to drop it there. My name is Ricky Gonzalez from the marketing team here at Iris, and with that being said, I'm gonna hand it over to Trevor.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks, Ricky. Yeah, so I just wanted to cover FAA regulations. I did an update of a presentation I gave a couple months back. You know, regulations, they don't typically change in a couple months, but there's some updates to give. So when we're talking the current regulatory environment for beyond visual line of sight flight, there's really four means/methods of getting to that. So one of the most recent ones that just came out, thanks to all the work that Chula Vista did in IPP with San Diego, is this public aircraft operations, what they're calling tactical BVLOS, so TBVLOS. Essentially what that is public aircraft operations Part 91 waiver for beyond visual line of sight flight. It has certain altitude and latitude altitude and basically lateral displacement from obstacles that they have to maintain, but it's for firefighters, police officers, public safety officials that are really like in an emergency situation. They might be within a Lance area or a city or something, and so they really just need to get up, maintain flight and beyond visual line of sight with their operation just for safety or security purposes. And so there's guidance that was issued by the FAA recently on procuring one of those. You do need an existing COA to get there, but if you don't, there's also guidance on getting a COA to operate under PAO. Other than that, there's the Part 107 typical waivers that everyone is used to. There has been a few more issued over this year, specifically through the IPP, I should say. Most noticeably, most of those have been some sort of package delivery operation, which are tied to a Part 135 certificate. So, Part 135 by itself isn't a direct path to beyond visual line of sight flight, but it is a certificate that's necessary when you're doing package delivery. Due to economic authority, you need that certificate to fly beyond visual line of sight. And then last but not least, and definitely not the most common, is the typical 44807 exemption process. That is kind of the catch-all that was the replacement under 2018 Authorization Act for Section 333. So, when we're talking beyond visual line of sight flight, there's really several different definitions, and it's used kind of just holistically throughout the industry. Visual line of sight flight, self-explanatory. You're getting somewhere up to 1.3, maybe 1 mile. It really just depends on the size of your unmanned aircraft, how far you can go under Part 107 regulations. As soon as you get out of that, there's what's the FAA considers as BVLOS. What that really means is BVLOS with a visual observer. There's really two different methods to use that visual observer. There's the method where the visual observer is just essentially maintaining a line of sight with the aircraft itself, and then there's the method that's more recent and typically what's under the existing Part 107 waivers now is where you have visual observers that are just clearing the airspace. So what that allows you to do is get out further. You're not having to maintain line of sight with the aircraft itself, but you're maintaining the see and avoid standards that there's really no waiver to right now. And then there are a few waivers out there and different exemptions as well that have been issued to different people under IPP and under different programs specifically, where they're flying, BVLOS with no VOs. They have what we could call an electronic observer at this point. So they're using onboard mitigation such as CASIA, or they're using ground-based detect and avoid, which is radar, to maintain that. So, getting into 107.31 and .33 a little bit further, as soon as you go after a .31 waiver, you're essentially saying RPIC doesn't have to maintain line of sight with the UA. So at that point, they're going to mandate that you use visual observers. And then the next step beyond that would be adding that .33 to where you're not maintaining direct visual contact with them. So again, there's no regulatory method right now to waive 107.37, which is the see and avoid requirements. So, if that's the goal, which I think it is most people's goal within the industry to be flying beyond visual line of sight, when you're going after a waiver, which is what I'm going to focus on today, is just 107 waivers. When you're putting that safety case together, really what you want to focus on is your documentation and your risk assessment methodology. There's different ways to package it up. I mean, there's JARA SORA that's recently been put together as sort of an international way to do it. There's the 80/40 process that the FAA has updated to include unmanned aircraft. Doesn't really matter which one you choose, but definitely consider, not just telling the FAA how you're going to do your operation, but showcasing that you've assessed the total risk of that operation. When you do that, make sure you're considering specifically the command and control of the aircraft. It's super important and beyond visual line of sight flight. Because once it's out of your line of sight, really all you have to maintain, similar to flying instrument rules, is your instruments, which is linked to command and control. The other two considerations as part of that risk assessment are the ground and air risk. So even if you're not going after an operations over people waiver, and we can't waive the see and avoid requirements, you still have to consider what mitigation you're putting into place. Once that drone is beyond visual line of sight, you don't know if there's people under it. You don't know what could potentially happen when it's lost link, things like that. So you have to take that into account. So really what I mean when you're putting together what we call robust documentation or risk mitigation, you're building up your documents to your operational complexity. There's no standardized set of documents you have to submit in a safety case by the FAA right now. They haven't provided that clarity yet, but you can gain some lessons learned and use what is working for the waivers that have been issued so far. So, in those provisions specifically, they typically call out having some sort of flight operations manual that has specific sections, standard operating procedures for the CONOP you're submitting, some sort of emergency management system or response plan. That's part of that, that considers your operating area. And another big one is even a basic safety management system utilizing the FAA orders that have been put out. And then a big one that is still kind of the holdup, since there's really no standardized training or maintenance on UAS programs right now. They're still expecting that you have specific training regarding the CONOP you're submitting and the platform you're flying. So getting a little bit deeper into command and control, like I said, this is a big one, and it's a big blocker for anyone that's tried to fly, any big distance if they've got that far in the process. Right now, we have to maintain compliance with the FCC. So what that means is, on licensed frequencies, there's typically Part 15 requirements that those have to abide by. Really, that's a huge limiting factor for beyond visual line of sight flight right now. There's very few licensed UAS frequencies in use, and so typically, you're limited to about 1 watt output. Depending on your antenna height, you're going to have to maintain that compliance with the certificate, and then that's really going to impact your range considerably. That being said, I mean, there have been people that have solved this. It's not easy without having infrastructure and the considerations in place to do so. Another big way to address that is just performing validation flights, making sure that you're actually checking and providing data as part of your application that your command and control is going to be able to be maintained across your entire flight path. And if you can, there's people out there that do C2 analysis using signal propagation software that you can pretty much provide, a third-party assessment of your command and control across your actual terrain, actual wattages, things like that. So, getting back into the ground risk, really what that means is, how are you going to handle operating over people? There's 3 ways to do this right now. Your operations will just not fly over people. So that's, if you can control the ground area that you're operating over, say you own the right of way, for instance, or you've coordinated and quarantined off the area so that there would be no non-participants in the area. As long as you can provide and document that that's happened, that's one step to do that. Other than that, there's a tactical method. There's been nothing approved that said we're not going to operate over people, and here's how we know we're not. There's technology that's been put in place, and then there is considerations for such things as parachutes. So you've probably seen some .39 waivers issued for the ASTM parachutes. So that's one way to do it for a tactical method. And then something new that is still in works and working its way through the Federal Register right now is the type certification change under 21 and through the durability and reliability program, which I'll talk a little bit about. So DNR came about through the IPP efforts, essentially to solve beyond visual line of sight flight ground risk. It's really a streamlined type certification and production certificate process. Hate to say streamlined, but it's really just kind of a scaled down method. So it involves, a locked configuration on an aircraft, a typical flight hour demonstration that's linked back to the population density you're expected to fly over, minimal operational performance testing, and then specific demonstrations. So this is all really linked back to your OEM or whoever you partnered up with to provide the aircraft system for your operation. They'll be the ones going through this process. That being said, there's a lot of OEMs that are also operators, so this is tied in pretty close. And then really big part of that is the design and documentation requirements that have been spelled out. So they're getting specifics on what they want to see for the aircraft. Yeah, we're good, Ricky. Cool. And then getting to the air risk. This is another big problem for beyond visual line of sight flight. The ways that you can mitigate it right now is flying in a special use or atypical airspace. So that would be a TFR or essentially anywhere where you can guarantee that there would be no non-participating aircraft. That's obviously not scalable, but it still has its uses, specifically with like firefighting, things like that. And then, of course, we've talked about visual observers. That is one accepted method now. Excuse me. And then once you get beyond that, it's really coming down to that safety case. What data can you provide? What strategic mitigation can you put in place? Time, place, manner restrictions are huge to minimize exposure to the NAS, basically. Any data you can provide, whether it's open sky ADS-B data or non-cooperative traffic, where you have someone sitting out there with a counter just counting traffic, that's going to be put into assessing that air risk. And then really the fourth method that's still scaling out is tactical mitigation to meet the see and avoid requirements, which is where Iris automation comes into play. So yeah, I mean, as I'm sure you deduced, there's kind of this disconnect between technology and regulations right now that's currently being solved. What that really means at a deeper level is, working out some sort of means of compliance for both detect and avoid systems and unmanned aircraft systems within the type certification process. There's been guidance issued that essentially, flying beyond visual line of sight is going to have minimum requirements. One of those is probably going to be type certification. Another thing is the ASTM DA test methods, which is, one of hopefully the potential methods to meet a performance for detect and avoid that would be adopted. Similar to a MOPS and a TSO that has been issued for DA systems on the larger side, that has been advanced and it's been at work for a really long time, so it's a little bit further ahead. We're kind of catching up there for the smalls, but it's most of that work is being done on the ASTM side. And then, as I said, C2 is still a huge consideration. The FCC and the FAA put out a Section 374 report that I recommend reading through that is really guidance and a potential way to get around the unlicensed band problems that we're having right now. So that's, a long-term implementation. I imagine that's going to take a couple years, but it's really going to give people the ability to fly beyond visual line of sight in a safe manner. And then it's just adoption of standards. ASTM has been doing some awesome work getting standards put out, RTCA as well, and really comes down to the FAA just adopting those. So moving Part 107 forward, that's definitely happening. There's been a lot of huge developments thanks to the IPP and thanks to just FAA's work. We have the remote ID NPRM that came out. Hopefully that's going to get adopted by the end of the year. And really that NPRM is the first step in scaling up beyond visual line of sight It's called out in the Reauthorization Act as something that's necessary to scale up UTM and BVLOS. After that, we should have the operations over people and night NPRM coming out. They've already issued an advanced NPRM that's really going to enable those two operations, and it's going to be closely tied into the type certification process. I believe the Part 21 modification for TC is coming out very shortly in the Federal Register. They're going through comments right now and assessing their stance on those comments. So, what Part 107 looks like over the next year, nobody really knows. We've solved Part 107 on a very limited basis, but Part 107 really wasn't built for beyond visual line of sight flight. There has been a little bit more success using Part 135 as far as going through the waiver exemption process to get that, but that's really not obtainable for everyone. Especially smaller operators, there's a huge barrier to get to that level of documentation at your organization and training and things like that need to be addressed. So really finding the middle ground between Part 135 and 107 requirements. Whatever part comes out next, it's going to have to solve training, operation, documentation, and the type certification requirements. So pathways CS right now, that being said, like while there are a lot of hurdles right now, there are approvals that are getting scaled out in specific areas and for specific use cases. So if you're going to go after a waiver, really what you want to do is combine multiple mitigation strategies. You don't want to just apply with a parachute that's been tested on your aircraft and really no other data as a means. You want to take the holistic picture and do the risk assessment all the way through and figure out what you need to do to tie in all that mitigation strategy. And really is taking a look at your organizational and your operational documentation and approach. People that have had success getting approved really take a manned aviation approach to these operations because that's what's required under the safety, when you're flying beyond visual line of sight. And then last but not least is really just take a look at the SRM process that the FAA has laid out. Not everything is acceptable within the NAS right now just because the technology isn't there. It's going to take a while for it to get to essentially check the box and you're good to go, which is when we're really going to get out of the waiver process, but that's not in the cards right now. So, one of the methods that we expect is definitely going to be scalable at some point is CASIA 360. We recently developed, the Regulatory Resource Center, which is taking all these approaches I've talked about and essentially packaging them up and providing a workflow for people to run through to see where their organization is and where they need to get to potentially get those waivers. And then on the technology side, we're really trying to solve what's going to be required from the product standpoint, from a detect and avoid standpoint, relative to the standards that are coming out, relative to what the FAA wants. So yeah, that's RRC. Right now, we've scaled something up for the United States for FAA Part 107 and COAs, and then on the Transport Canada side, we have SFOC support in there as well. So it's pretty much good to a low to medium air risk. Or not just air risk, but just your overall, your sales score, which is your specific integrity score that you're going to have to hit up to about a SAIL 4. And it's not a guarantee for approval, but we have had some successes with customers that have gone through there, and recently expecting one to get approved in Canada next couple weeks. So yeah, I'll be talking about what's going on in Canada at 3 o'clock. I'll do an overview of the RPAS ORA process, which is really the risk assessment process used in Transport Canada. Talk a little bit about RPAS safety assurance, which is, again, tied back to the aircraft and getting those approvals. And then recent NPA, which is a notice proposed amendment that was issued by Transport Canada specifically for low-risk BVLOS.
Nice. Well, thank you, Trevor, for going through that for us. If anyone in the audience has any additional questions or comments, feel free to drop it in the chat for Trevor to address. I guess one thing Trevor, can you talk a little bit about the approval we got in Kansas? I know you were on the other side of that. Can you talk a little about how that went and got to the point of being approved?
Yep. Ricky's referencing the integration pilot program, specifically the Kansas DOT waiver that was approved back in August of last year. So really what we did was go through this process that I just spelled out on a much deeper level than, this high level overview. But we built a training program. We did testing on our DA system, which, at the time was CASIA standard system. We demonstrated, our command and control link. We did simulations. We went through this whole process to get to that point where we had the data that would be necessary to apply for that waiver. And so, there was a lot of effort there. It took over a year of just straight effort into the program to get, one waiver. But the good thing is, lessons learned come from that, and not just on the operator side, but the FAA side. And so you have probably seen, if you've checked, the waiver safety explanation guidelines within the last year, they've added a ton of information into what they're wanting to see on applications. And a lot of that has come from IPP, especially for beyond visual line of sight and ops over people.
Awesome. Yeah, and can you talk a little bit about the relationship between ASTM and the FAA in terms of how they adopt standards, and what could people expect in the future?
Yeah, so ASTM is fairly new into the aviation standard space, compared to RTCA. So typically, RTCA would essentially agree on an industry standard, and then that would be adopted into some sort of TSO or means of compliance by the FAA. With ASTM, it's not quite worked out to that level and that flow, specifically for where we're working in this small space for lower altitude BVLOS. But we do expect the standards that are coming out specifically for DA requirements, that those are going to feed into some sort of means compliance testing.
Nice. And I guess the FAA is notoriously difficult to get those approvals. Can you talk a little bit about what are the challenges that people face when applying a waiver? Where do you see them fail the most, and in what areas?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to the presentation of the package. Typically the FAA won't just straight up deny, any waiver application. They'll typically turn around and say, we need an RFI, request for more information, because you didn't provide enough detail or fidelity in the package to explain how you're going to meet the requirements. That's really hard to address right now for some of their questions, specifically regarding DA, right? Like that's something we're working on heavily. But usually comes down to basic questions that all point back to the documentation or the attachments that you're providing. So making sure that your application has some sort of flow, that your CONOP is using, an industry standard. Those are all important things to consider.
Yes. And what should, I guess, people that are trying to fly true BVLOS miles and miles, what are some of the aircraft considerations they should have when they're putting this waiver together?
Yeah, so that's, like I said, one of the biggest challenges, but the good thing is it is being addressed. So, you should see some OEMs that are about to announce type certification, probably within the next couple months. There's been a lot of activity in that sector. And so really what that means is, once that OEM announces their type certificate is in hand, a lot of that ground risk for the operation is automatically taken care of. And so it's really going to come down to, okay, where are they flying? What airspace are they in? How much air traffic is in there? And then what technology requirements are we going to essentially need from the operator to reduce that air risk, which is where CASIA comes in.
Nice. And I know that the IPP1 is coming to conclusion soon. And what are some of the highlights that you expect to come out of the first one? And then what do you anticipate coming from IPP2?
Yeah. I don't know how much public information is out there on what's going on after IPP. So I'll kind of hold off on talking about that. But IPP1, I think that we're going to get a pretty substantial report from that. It's wrapping up here in about a month. And so, what they're putting together is all the lessons learned from that internally and putting those into the next program, hopefully. So IPP1 was really about figuring out what the problems are that are blocking beyond visual line of sight flight and other advanced operations. And I think that most of that have been addressed besides beyond visual line of sight, which I think is where the focus will be for the next IPP is solving those remaining issues, specifically with type certification, specifically with DA performance metrics, and then specifically with C2 problems.
Nice. And I guess there's a lot of people that are wondering how they could get a waiver without being in the IPP. And can you talk a little about that and how that led to the development of something like the Regulatory Resource Center?
Yeah, so what we did with our RRC was, luckily we were able to participate on several IPPs, and so as this package that they were expecting was getting developed for BVLOS, we've taken all that and really plugged it into the Regulatory Resource Center, whether it's documentation guidance or the workflow, or connecting through our network of partners on what they need, whether it's type certification or whether it's documentation that they need. It's really just a resource that's meant to say, here's where you want to get, maybe we start with the crawl phase, and then here's what we're going to have to develop and work on to get to the stage where we can apply.
Awesome. No, well, thank you, Trevor. If anyone has any last minute questions, feel free to drop it in the chat. I do want to, like Trevor mentioned, he is having another session later on today because he's that good, and we focused just on primarily on Transport Canada and talk a little bit about the variations on those standards and our work there. Steve, we got one question in from Mohammed to thank you. It says, what type of communication technologies are typically being used to maintain continuous connection link with UAVs for BVLOS operations?
Yeah, so there's really three main ones that are in use right now. So there's the unlicensed spectrum, which is your typical 900 megahertz radios, 2.4 or 5 gig. Those are being used to the maximum extent possible. Depending on your terrain, you're probably going to get a max of 10 miles there, and that's perfect propagation. And so a lot of the BVLOS waivers are limited by just their C2 link. So there has been some exploratory work into using LTE. The thing is though, there's really been no performance metrics set for LTE as far as reliability and guaranteeing that those signal's there. And so what they're looking at pushing towards, especially for BVLOS, is a licensed frequency. So, command and control non-payload radios that are operating on C-band or potentially on the previous used frequency in the manned world. So one of the two.
Nice. Yeah, and before we close this session out, I do want to give people ways for them to continue the discussion or to connect with the team. We'll be here at the booth. Most of our members will be here on the booth if you want to hop in the chat or come up live and discuss with us. We're also on the GRIP app if you want to connect with any of our team members and exchange any contact information. And then if you also want to check out the Regulatory Resource Center and get a bigger picture of what Trevor's talking about, and that's you can find that at irisonboard.com. And so I just want to give a big thank you to Trevor. Trevor, what's the best way for someone to contact you?
Yep. So you can reach me in my email. It's pretty simple. It's trevor@irisonboard.com. It's Trevor, Trever. But yeah, that'd be the best way to contact me, or just add me on GRIP and we'll get in touch.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Trevor, again. I'll see you later at 3. I hope everyone can join us then too. But thank you for stopping by at the session. Have a good one.
Yeah, thanks, guys.